Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rash's World. Today we have a very special guest, an award-winning filmmaker. Hi, Jennifer. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you doing, Rush? Nice to see you, meet you, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, your documentary that you've made is Photographic Justice, the Corky Lee story. I very much enjoyed it. I think it flows really well. It's a fascinating subject, both in terms of topic as well as the person, Corky Lee himself. And I also loved it how it's chronological. It's not like some Netflix documentaries that jump in time and it's hard to follow. It's straightforward, but very, very impressive. And so I want to talk about, and my first question for you is this: what does photographic justice mean? And the second part is, how is it related to Corky Lee? And I think we can talk a lot of things just based on these first questions here.
So I'm going to combine those two questions. So in 2002, Corky was going to go to film he wanted to document people, Chinese Americans, in front of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was in Promontory Summit. So it's when those two trains met in that very famous photo. And so while he was there, the New York Times the New York Times at some point decided they wanted to document what Corky was doing. And so they followed him to Promontory Summit. And Corky took this photo of, Chinese Americans in front of these two locomotives. And then during the interview, he was interviewed and they said, tell us about what happened. And Corky coined the term photographic justice, which for him was putting in Asian Americans, particularly in this case Chinese Americans, in front of the locomotives where they were not filmed originally. The original iconic photo from 1869 did not have Chinese Americans in it, or any Asian American
I
in it.
found that shocking, very
Yeah.
shocking, because it was the Asians who created it. So why not at least give a little bit of credit? So it's like complete injustice there, and I just love the fact that there is a way of fixing it, which is something that Corky did. I mean, not completely, of course, but still reframing things. And for me, that really shows the power of images. A picture speaks 1,000 words, and so that is really combined here for very good purposes. And combining here photography with politics is not that strained, as opposed to sometimes writing and film. But in this case, he's capturing things and recapturing things, as you're explaining here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then he recreated it again in 2014. He really wanted to do 145th anniversary. And so he's done it subsequently till 2019.
Mhm. So he's like a rock star, a superhero, I think. But his guitar is the camera, and so he's been taking he was taking a lot of pictures, close to a million pictures, like 800,000, I think, over 50 years. And so, what are some of the things that drove him? What would you say? And the documentary expands on that, but what would you add to that too?
Yeah, I feel like, it was definitely in junior high when he saw that photo, that iconic 1869 photo, and did not see any Asian faces. It was in the back of his head. But more than that, I think as he got older and he started to see the populace with Asian American, like there were much more Asian Americans in his life as he got older. And I think he started to be aware of their contributions and their struggles. And he really became very proud of being Asian American, and he really kind of wanted to document everything that was going on, good and the bad. And I also think he wanted to combat the stereotypical images. So he took his own images, right? He wanted to show the real struggles, the real celebrations, and not just of his Chinese American community, but he opened it up to all AAPIs. And it was a very conscious decision for him to be inclusive. And I think that messaging alone is like such a important message for today, but it was also so different. Like it was like such a unique idea back then. And Corky really had to like make friends with people and to show that he wasn't a spy or he didn't have any ill means to be there, because he was like, it was unusual to see not someone of your own race in your own, taking photos, right? Like he had to establish himself. And so over time, like obviously Corky did a really good job, and every community knows of Corky very well because he kept showing up in taking those
I
important images.
love that his persistence, and he wouldn't give up. He would continue, and if they didn't accept him, he'd try another person at the same office. And so I found that very interesting. And so it's like the you believe what you see, and that's something he says. And so there are a lot of images that are not taken, so we don't know about them. And so in terms of protests too, and we have certain focus there, but we didn't have the ones of Asian Americans being beaten by the police too in the late 60s. And so that image became famous too. I mean, of course, but it brings attention to these causes. But if you don't have the picture, you don't get the attention. So it is really helping here to see things more clearly in many ways.
Yeah, I think when you see the film, it is a really amazing thing to see the archival footage,
Mhm.
like the archival footage of like not only Corky's photos, but the actual moving archival footage from the 70s where
Mhm.
they have the Asian American movement is like taking place with the Vietnam War in the background, and you see all the Asians protesting. I think that those images are indelible once you see them, but you can take them for granted. These aren't images from your ABC, NBC, CBS archives. These are images from those who took them in the community. And I think that's the important message, right? Like if these people hadn't taken their own community and what was going on in their own backyard, this, it would have been it wouldn't have been as enlightening of a story without those images. And so Corky did his part by taking photos, but there were other people taking video footage and other things. So I think that that is a really important message to this day. It's a little easier now because we all have cameras,
Yeah.
but back then it was I mean, that really took foresight to do that.
Yeah, and also you don't know how the pictures are turning out until you develop them later. So it's kind of like you try out different things. But I love his approach to art too. He saw it as art form. He's not just a journalist, he's an artist, right? And a journalist at the same time. And what you're saying about the events, I was fascinated by how many events go on in New York throughout the year, all these amazing, colorful things that we don't hear much about, but there's something always going on. And I think if that is something that people should be more aware of their surroundings, their neighborhood, and explore these events, avenues, opportunities there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Corky, when Corky was alive, people would hear about him or someone would like talk, like in college, some kid would learn about his photos and then they would subsequently reach out to Corky. Corky
Mhm.
always had people under his wing who he was more than willing to share his time and his knowledge with and take them around and introduce them to people.
Just quickly,
So,
I love how he showed them how to take clandestine photos, right? And especially
yeah.
the cameras. I just love that. These are like tips and tricks that are very useful.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Corky was always willing to share.
Yeah, and that is wonderful. So again, combining all of these things, bringing attention to these events, and adding minorities that were left out, and especially the railroad pictures, but many other things too, by focusing on them, I think, and bringing that into the media attention is very important. So one of the things he says that he was not cut out for teaching, which I find interesting because I'm an instructor myself. I think he would have made a good teacher, actually. But I'm glad he chose that profession too, of following his passion, really. Even though, I mean, it's hard when you do that. There's often a lot of resistance, especially from family members and parents and so on, who don't necessarily appreciate that, at least at the beginning.
For sure. I think he knew his limitations, and it's kind of like why he didn't work, because obviously you would say, well, he was the photographer. Why didn't he work for an organization, right? And then he would have like a regular income and everything. But it's not who he was, and he knew what he wanted to shoot. And it's the same reason that he decided that he didn't want to, be a teacher. It's like he knew that he was like for him, it was better for him to be out on the streets taking the photos rather than telling kids what to do, right? That would make a bigger impact for him. So he knew what his limitations were and where his head was. You didn't always understand it because I think he would have been a good teacher. He could have been a good writer, but that's not where his interest was.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so he took the photos and let other people write the stories.
Exactly. Yeah. So one thing they talk about, he says as well, is if you're a photographer, keep shooting. Only if you're a photographer, keep shooting. But I would like to extend that to also your documentary as a filmmaker. Keep making films because they're amazing. And I want everybody to know again, this is Photographic Justice, the Corky Lee story, and filmmaker Jennifer Takaki here on Arash's World. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your knowledge, your documentary, as well as your information on this amazing person, Corky Lee.
Thank you, Raj. I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks so much.